But for my money, the most bizarre news of all today, political and otherwise, comes out of the great state of Idaho. Here's Idaho. Boise is Idaho's state capital. It's the state's largest city. And in southwest Boise this past year, they elected a new state representative. They pretty much always elect Republicans, but they elected a new Republican state rep last November. His name is Mark Patterson. He calls himself a constitutional Republican. He's a Ron Paul guy in Idaho. And he got a really big boost in his race for the state legislature when he was endorsed by Idaho's new high-profile, very conservative congressman, Raul Labrador. It's the top thing on Mark Patterson's campaign website. I am proud to endorse him, says Raul Labrador. But pretty much right after Mark Patterson got elected in Boise, there were some signs of trouble. NBC's Channel 7 locally started turning up some weird stuff about his background. His website, for example, had described him as having been a student at the University of Southern California, having gone to USC. Turns out he never went to USC. His website also described him as a petroleum engineer. Turns out he is not a petroleum engineer. He's not an engineer at all. His website also described him as a professional bicyclist. He was not a professional bicyclist. As KTVB found out, quote, he had no professional license, even though he did ride a bike. Representative Patterson insists that he does remember being paid to be an endorser for bike lubricant at one point, and that should count toward him being a professional bicyclist. And so even though he took down the claims that he went to USC and that he was a petroleum engineer, he took down those claims because he didn't go to USC and he isn't an engineer. His website still today insists that he was a professional bicyclist. And really, who are you to judge? Now, though, comes the dark part of this story, which is that Republican State Representative Mark Patterson, it turns out, has twice been arrested and charged with forcible rape. One of those times in Ohio, he was acquitted. He was found not guilty of those charges. But the other time he was arrested and charged with rape, he pled guilty. He pled guilty specifically to assault with intent to commit rape, although the state of Florida misspelled the word commit when they said what he pleaded to. So he was initially charged with forcible rape. He pled guilty to assault with intent to commit rape. He did some time in jail and he did some time on probation. And because of the probation sentence and the plea bargain that went along with it, under Florida law, this all happened in Tampa, Florida, this went down on Mark Patterson's record as a withheld judgment on the assault with intent to commit rape charge. So fast forward to 2007 and across the country to Idaho. And in 2007, soon-to-be state representative Mark Patterson applies for a license to carry a concealed weapon in the state of Idaho. He presumably does not mention on his application the rape issue in his past, since Idaho law says you can't get a concealed weapons permit if you have committed, say, assault with intent to commit a serious felony, like, for example, rape. So apparently he did not mention that on his application in 2007, or presumably, again, on his application in 2012. The application in Idaho specifically asks you, have you ever had a withheld judgment for a criminal offense which would disqualify you from obtaining a concealed weapon license? In order to get the gun permit in Idaho, Representative Mark Patterson has to have said no to that question. But if he said no to that, that is a lie. His past rape charge, his guilty plea, means he should have been turned down when he applied for a concealed weapons permit. And so now, the Idaho sheriff to whom he applied for that gun permit has revoked the permit, saying basically, you know, having a violent felony on your record means you can't have a weapons permit. And you certainly can't lie about your violent felony record in order to get a weapons permit. This is not a hard call, right? Whether or not you understand or have respect for the arcane laws related to guns in this country, this is kind of an easy one. I mean, even if you were acquitted the second time you were arrested for forcible rape, that one time you did plead guilty to assault with intent to rape, that means you cannot have a concealed weapons permit, ever, anywhere, even if you are a newly elected state representative. So who knows why he was able to get away with lying on that application once, and at least for a while on his second try too. But eventually, the sheriff in Ada County, Idaho, found him out. And now this weekend, the Idaho Statesman has done a big, long feature on the past rape charges and the guilty plea and the revocation of his concealed carry permit. And, you know, it all has to be a really embarrassing time, right? We've posted links to the Idaho Statesman reporting on this story, which is really incredible work. But in part because the Idaho Statesman's incredible journalism on this story, because it is happening in his little hometown of Boise, Idaho, this has got to be very embarrassing for this politician, right? I mean, he's a freshman lawmaker. He's part of the Ron Paul wing of the party. He's endorsed by the highest profile Idaho politician in Washington since Larry Craig and the wide stance thing. Boise has got to be mortified by this guy, right? Having elected the guy who didn't actually go to that college and who isn't actually an engineer and who pretty much isn't even a professional bicyclist, although let's argue about it. And oh, hey, now, do you want to hear about the rape charges too? In any normal world, this is the part where the guy steps down to spend more time with his family or whatever. But because this is not a normal world, because this is our world, this is not any normal world that you might even expect to find in non-magical realist fiction, because this is our world now. The rape charges Republican lawmaker caught lying about it on his gun application has launched a counterattack, saying this is all just a trumped-up bit of police retaliation for some legislation he sponsored. Because he's the guy who sponsored legislation that would have sent Idaho cops to jail, would have put the cops in jail if Idaho law enforcement officers attempted to enforce federal gun laws in the state of Idaho. He says because he sponsored that legislation, this whole ruckus now is just the man coming for him and his guns in retaliation. That sheriff who discovered my rape conviction was just, he says, angry about being exposed as an opponent of the Second Amendment. 25 years ago, this week, on November 10th, 1988, a president named Ronald Reagan signed a piece of legislation called the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988. It essentially made illegal plastic guns, or any guns made with so little metal that they could not be spotted by metal detectors. Ronald Reagan signed that law in 1988, long enough ago now that it is due to expire next month, just as we are facing new 3D printing technology that makes plastic guns more of a reality now than ever before. It was 25 years ago this week that President Reagan signed that ban. 25 years. It's been 20 years since a bill was passed that was named for President Reagan's press secretary, who was shot in the head and paralyzed and very nearly killed in the assassination attempt on President Reagan by John Hinckley, Jr. That bill was called the Brady Bill, and it established the principle of people having to pass background checks in order to buy a gun. Since John Hinckley had been under psychiatric care and had just previously been arrested on gun charges before he was able to walk into a Texas pawn shop and buy a pistol, no questions asked, and he then used that pistol to shoot the president and a Secret Service agent and a D.C. police officer and Press Secretary Jim Brady. The Brady campaign is still around. And right now, the Brady campaign is keeping up their efforts to try to apply background checks to all gun purchases, not just the ones from licensed gun dealers. On the 20th anniversary of the Brady bill being signed into law, they just released this ad. And I will tell you, I think, personally, no offense intended, but I think most animated political ads really suck. But I think this one's really good.
Meet Mr. Bad Guy. He's done a lot of really bad things. But the one thing he's missing is a gun. Good thing a Brady background check blocks him from getting a gun at the gun store. No gun for you. But he's not gonna stop. He's a bad guy, not a quitter. So he goes online where he doesn't even need a background check to buy a gun. Score for Mr. Bad Guy. Easy peasy. And ta-da! Now he can do even badder bad guy things. And just think, 40% of gun sales happen just like this. Thousands every day. No Brady background check. So why won't Congress fix this? Maybe they're rooting for the bad guys. Tell Congress to stop helping bad guys get guns. Sign the petition to finish the job and demand Brady background checks on all gun sales. Easy peasy.
Usually animation in a political ad is shorthand for don't bother watching, this is going to be lame, but that is a really good ad. Released this week on the 20th anniversary of Brady background checks being required at gun stores, if not anywhere else. But of course, the real politic of this issue right now in our country is less easy peasy, like the ad says, and more like Idaho. Because do you want to know what the resolution is? To the story of the Republican state representative who, it turns out, was charged with forcible rape twice, and who pled guilty to assault with intent to rape, and who then lied about that on his gun permit application twice, and then got caught lying about it by the local sheriff. Do you want to know how this story ends? The guy gets to keep his guns. He gets to keep his concealed carry permit, after all, even though, rape and lying about it. Even though guilty plea to a violent felony, he gets to keep the guns and keep the concealed weapons permit. Because, turns out, there is a state law that says if you're an elected official in Idaho, one of 3,000 elected officials in Idaho at every level down to dog catcher. If you are an elected official in Idaho, there is a state law that says the legal requirements for getting a gun permit in that state don't apply to you. The local press, this is coverage from the local CBS affiliate looking into this. They've been trying to figure out why elected officials are exempt from the law about guns. But nobody seems to know. Elected officials are just exempt from the law for whatever reason. And so when aliens come to Earth, who are we going to pick to explain to them that this is what happened to the oldest and most stable democracy on Earth? That once upon a time, even conservatives in that country supported an outright ban on certain dangerous kinds of weapons. And even conservatives supported at least checking to see if people were, say, violent felons before agreeing to let them have guns. Once upon a time, everybody pretty much agreed that made sense. But then within one generation of that normalcy, in one generation, in less than 30 years, this country became the place where the response by law to the violent attempted rapist elected official who lied about it and who got caught lying about it, the only legal response to that man is, "Sorry, sir, here's your gun. Here's your gun, sir. Here's your concealed weapons permit. We're really sorry for the inconvenience." That's the only possible legal response to the guy who pled guilty to assault with attempt to rape. "Sorry, sir, here's your gun." How can this possibly be who we are right now?